What's happening, financial coaches? It's Pete here. I want to talk to you today about why I don't generally revisit the motivation for my financial clients' financial decisions. And what I'm talking about here in terms of motivation is, the kind of that first question that we'll often ask people, like, what brings you in today? Or what, inspired the call? Or why are you doing this? Or whatever it might be, right? And one of the things that happens in coaching training, just in general, is often some training around asking about the motivation, uncovering, discovering, identifying the motivation, and then revisiting it often, right? And sometimes I've even seen coaches revisit it every time they do a coaching call. So, for example, in smoking cessation training, I've seen, people ask, and coaches ask people that are trying to give up smoking, why do you want to quit smoking? And the answers can be, I want to spend more time with my family. I want to be healthier. I want to be able to play with my grandkids. I want to live longer and see my kids grow up or whatever it might be, right? Those are all standard types of motivations for that type of ask. In financial, you might be able to find out that someone wants to earn more money. But what's the motivation behind that? Well, it's because I've never had any money, or I grew up in a family that was always struggling with money, and I don't want my family to deal with that. Or I want to earn more money so that I can have more free time. Or I want to earn more money so that we can go on vacations. I want to earn more money so that I can give my family the life experience that I want, right? So those are motivations, and those are kind of typical motivations for financial services and financial coaching. And the reason I don't go back to those a lot, you might say, hey, don't you remember you want to earn this money so that you can do more with your family? And there are a number of reasons why I don't revisit motivation a lot. First of all, the number one reason is that in my mind, constantly revisiting the motivation dilutes it. So if I constantly ask you every time we meet, you're pursuing a side hustle, or you're driving for Uber on the weekends, or you're asking for more work at work, or whatever, you're kind of pursuing a raise through, career advancement at work, to earn more money. If I keep asking you every time, and what's your motivation for this? And we've talked about this, and they say, hey, Pete, it's so that I can provide for my family, that I can do things with my family that I want. It kind of dilutes it. It kind of starts taking the power away from it, because they're like, well, I told you last time, I'll tell you this time. And you just kind of get caught in the cycle where you're just saying things. And yes, it was kind of more more poignant, more acute at that time. You felt it more. It was more emotional when you realize that was the motivation. But the more you say it, the more you just kind of are conditioned into throwing it out there. Oh, to say spend more time with my family, to give my family the life I like. The more times I say this, it just becomes kind of monotonous, and it just becomes something you say as opposed to something you really feel. So yes, if we go back and revisit those motivations to help kind of recenter us, or to help us prioritize again, or get reinvigorated, I will do that. But on a regular basis, I don't do that, because I don't want to dilute what that motivation is. The second reason I don't revisit motivation a lot is because motivations change, right? They evolve, they change with time, and they can even change within the coaching experience itself. And what I mean by this is, if I come to you and I say, look, I'm looking for ways to make some more money so that I can help my family, these are things that can certainly happen. These are things that are certainly a priority, and it's the way we frame things, especially at the beginning part of our coaching relationship. But as I get into this process, as I say, hey, what are ways I can make more money? And I say, hey, here's some things that you might want to try. Maybe advertise tutoring because you're really good at math, or some of these other things, or you play trumpet, or whatever it might be. And as you get through this process, the motivation should often be a little closer than just something nebulous like help my family. Now the process should be, hey, you've built these flyers, right? So what now your kind of your near-term motivation is, well, imagine putting up those flyers and now having someone call you, right? Having someone say, hey, you are an expert in this. I want to acknowledge that, and I want to work with you, right? That's kind of the motivation. The motivation now is that you've done some work, and why not reap the reward of this? So we're kind of going to these micro motivations, kind of these near-term, kind of more direct feedback cycle, these more immediate feedback loops. And so that's why I think the ultimate motivation is probably the same, but we're going to start focusing on motivations that are much more micro, much more immediate along that process. All right. So the third reason I don't revisit motivation a lot is oftentimes the motivation is not quite honest, right? It's kind of honest, but sometimes there are some things behind the scenes that we just don't want to say. We just don't want to necessarily admit, right? So sometimes we will say, hey, I want to make more money so I can spend more time with the family. But sometimes there's an underlying thing of, well, I want to buy a sports car, I want to buy a motorcycle, or I just want to have a little more cash so, I feel more comfortable when I go out. And sometimes we feel like those aren't worthy, noble reasons to want something, but they're true and they're valid, right? Maybe you want something because you just don't want to seem or appear like the poorest person on your block. There are all sorts of motivations. Spite is a real motivation. Hate, revenge, all these other things. They're not necessarily great motivations, but they're real. And oftentimes, sometimes we'll try to put a noble or an honorable type of motivation around something when we have some other motivation. So sometimes I'm not always convinced that what they say is the motivation is really the real motivation. And sometimes it's not that it's not noble. Sometimes it's just maybe embarrassing for people. They say, listen, I remember going to my father and asking if I could have $5 for lunch. And he's like, we don't have that money. And I just don't want to be that guy. Right. And so maybe the money issue is about something that people aren't willing to cop to because they feel like it's embarrassing for them. Right. So that's one of the things that the motivation might not be completely honest. And so if we keep using that, maybe it doesn't resonate with the client as much or the participant as much because they weren't really fully honest with us out of the gate, right? The fourth reason, sorry, I got text messages going off here, but this is real, keeping it real here. The fourth reason that I don't revisit motivation a lot is because I often think the motivation is set when they hire me. What I mean by that is, usually there's something happening, there's something that they want to accomplish, and that's why someone picks up the phone, sends me an email, and hires me. And so sometimes that motivation has already done the work, the hard work of getting them over the hump of starting the process of working with the coach and getting into a project and a process of achieving something, right? And so sometimes, to me, I don't really need the motivation anymore. I want to know what it is, but sometimes what the motivation was really meant to do is just get over that initial inertia of not doing anything to doing something. And now once we start doing something, it's actually not as hard as we think, right? So sometimes just pushing the car over the cliff is all you need to do. And once it's over the cliff, it'll just keep rolling and rolling and rolling, right? And so the motivation often, in my opinion, is what they need to get on the phone with you, to reach out, to say, hey, Pete, I've watched your videos and now I want to get out with you, or I've read your newsletter, or whatever it might be. I went to your workshop, but there's usually this big amount of inertia necessary to get over the hurdle of listening, consuming, but then acting on it and working with me. So sometimes that motivation has already done its job, right? So what I think is the motivation reveals kind of that long-term game plan. Usually the motivation is pretty nebulous. It's pretty broad, right? Help my family, be with my family, spend time with my family, give me freedom, those types of things. But what I want to do here is usually figure out what that motivation is so I know the same direction, but then help people come up with a process along the way. Give them some instant successes, right? Give them success after success, even if they're very small, because I think those successes provide the motivation that we need along the way. So what we don't need is usually just this motivation, kind of the sun sitting on the horizon all the time, saying, I'm just walking towards the sun. What we need to see is on the sidewalk itself, the penny that you're picking up, the next penny, those types of things. We need, my mind sometimes to focus on the small motivations more than the big motivation. And the process, building the process that is a ladder of success, a ladder of constant success with short feedback loops, with a lot of rewards, with progress being visible. Those are the things that I think provide motivation along the way. And that's the motivation that I focus on when I'm doing financial coaching. So hopefully that helps. I'll see you later.